Hello, Ted Huntington here for another book reading. This time I will be reading a very special book from my friend Terry Heflin. It is called Golden Circle, available on Amazon. I encourage you all to check out her book, all of her works on Amazon. This is Terry Heflin's Golden Circle. I'm going to read Chapter 4. Golden Circle, Chapter 4. Mid-morning the following day. The Coles Hotel, Marietta, Georgia. Robert and Rebecca have reunited and are now married. Both are now in the service of the Treasury Department as the war is coming to a close. Is the name Dr. George W. L. Bickley familiar? Rose Stewart slowly stirred her coffee, set the spoon in the saucer, pushed an envelope toward Robert, and watched his expression at her mention of the name. Robert and Rebecca sat across from the woman in the Coles Hotel scanty dining room, occupied only by a few officers in blue and their aides. Tall front and side windows were thrown wide open, and a slight June cross breeze ruffled the lace curtains. Tree-shaded leafy silhouettes danced on the bare hardwood floor. Rose Stewart had greeted Rebecca several minutes earlier with a tentative hug and a peck on the cheek. She had clutched an embroidered handkerchief and twisted it pensively. "Oh, my dear child, from the bottom of my heart, I never intended to place you in such danger. Oh, please forgive me, but I saw no other way to retrieve the route for the gold but to interfere so forcefully." Tears had spilled over onto her cheeks as the words tumbled out. Rose had sniffled and raised the linen to gently blot her cheeks. "Where Eugene had you taken, where he took you, I cannot apologize enough. How he—" Her words trailed off. "Mrs. Stewart, Rose, please." Rebecca had choked on the words. Rebecca remembered the terrifying night in Atlanta when she had been discovered as a Union spy at the home of Eugene and Rose Stewart. She had been arrested and sentenced to hang, but the encampment of nearby Union troops had led to her timely escape. It was not until later where she learned of Rose's loyalty toward the Union and the downfall of her husband's monetary scheme for Jefferson Davis's Confederacy. Rose's emotional outpouring had prompted Rebecca to take the older woman in her arms and lead her to a chair at the table. Her husband's fate at his wife's hand was not broached. Gone was Rose Stewart's finery, as none of it could be taken when she fled her home, but Rebecca recognized the confidence in the woman who wore a simple, pale blue, fuchsian dress with three-quarter sleeves and a small cap decorated with a thin braid. Rebecca watched the woman's eyes as she tucked a tear-stained handkerchief back into the small cloth purse, and then focused on the papers Robert drew closer to his place at the table. "Knights of the Golden Circle." Robert's eyebrows betrayed his interest. Rebecca's green eyes also shimmered with curiosity. "The group that plotted the kidnapping of President Lincoln as he traveled by train through Baltimore to Washington for his inauguration?" Rose nodded. "The one and the same, my dear." "Thought Dr. Bickley was in prison in Indiana." Robert traced the edges of the envelope. "He is, captured in July of last year as a Confederate spy. Will most certainly spend the remainder of the war in prison." Rose picked up her cup and sipped the cooling dark brew. Her shoulders drooped at this cavalier pronouncement. Rebecca reached out and placed an understanding hand on the woman's wrist, then frowned. "So if he is in prison—" "Just because he was arrested, tried, and convicted, Becca," Robert interrupted, "does not mean that he cannot pull the strings within his organization from inside prison walls." Rebecca did not have to wait long for a more detailed explanation from Rose. "Bickley has many followers, Rebecca, in the North as well as the South. Missives are slipped out undetected, code words are passed back and forth, and so on. The organization falls under 3 degrees: the military, the financial, and the governing. It is the financial degree that has Fessenden and the Department of Treasury concerned. Robert lifted his coffee cup, looked at the dregs, and set it back down. Rumor had it that Dr. Bickley had enlisted recruits from Quantrill's raiders. Rose agreed and pronounced sincerely, Captain William Quantrill is the other name in Fessenden's orders. According to reports, Union payrolls are being stolen by Quantrill's renegades and used to finance the defense of the rebels in Arkansas, Texas, and Missouri. He is a torment to General Sherman and the Western Territories. Quantrill. A shiver went up Rebecca's spine at the mention of this infamous Confederate irregular leader. Even under close scrutiny by his guards, Bickley arranged for the KGC to come into possession of counterfeit certificate gold plates in $20 and $50 denominations. Small enough to easily pass, Robert interjected. Rebecca breathed deeply and bit her lower lip. But how? Rose nodded with determination. Bickley has given orders that the counterfeit certificates be circulated throughout the North through rebel go-betweens under Quantrill's command, as well as several pockets of supporters in Ohio, Kentucky, and on into Washington, D.C. These plates are so authentic, even experts would have a hard time detecting the fake certificates from the real ones. Rose interlaced her fingers and placed her hands on the table. There are some powerful Eastern financial backers with Southern sympathies who want those plates put into production. She paused and studied Robert's manner. I gather you can surmise your role in this matter? Robert arched his eyebrows. Relieve the rebs of those plates. Rose laughed. More than that, Robert. Mr. Fessenden wants those plates completely destroyed and the shards delivered to Washington. They sat in silence and mulled over what had been revealed when a young girl slowly approached the table with a full pot of coffee and offered to refill their cups. Robert caught the girl's eye. Young'un, leave the pot. Yes, sir. She set the pot on the silver trivet, smiled shyly, curtsied, and backed away. Robert narrowed his eyes as he watched the girl retreat. How long have you been aware of the counterfeit plans? Rose ignored the replenished cup, softly moaned, and dropped her gaze to her hands, rubbing them gently. Eugene not only instigated the plan to deliver the gold shipment from Colorado to Richmond through his associates, but when I discovered he was in constant contact with Bickley's Knights, I knew our efforts to save the South had gone too far, too vehement. He had sold his soul, was such a willing conspirator. She lifted her gaze to Rebecca. That, my dear, is another reason I went to the Department of the Treasury. Quantrill, after Lawrence, Kansas, how could I stand by? She stammered and surveyed the now vacant dining room, shook her head. A moment of taut silence hung between them. Robert felt a pang of her grueling decision to betray her husband, then picked up the envelope. Fessenden sure of the information? Rose's eyes met his empathy, emitted a sigh, and regained her poise. Yes, the Copperheads and the government have not been silent. They are feeding conspiracy theories against those who still support the Union and the possibility of reunification and reconstruction. A flood of fake Treasury notes could systematically bring down the Republican cause. She poured a dollop of cream into her coffee, picked up her spoon, then swirled it slowly. Rebecca threw a sideways glance at Robert. Ruining the federal war chest would certainly add to the undermining of Mr. Lincoln's re-election. You have identified the situation exactly. Rose grinned and pointed to the envelope. Now to what Mr. Fessenden has outlined for us at the beginning of our journey together. Rebecca saw Robert purse his lips as he opened the covering and pulled out a single sheet of paper, methodically read the instructions. 2 rail tickets and a baggage voucher slipped into his fingers. He scanned the receipt, replaced it with the tickets, nodded, and then tucked the travel documents into his side coat pocket. Rose twittered and winked. Mr. Fessenden has outlined a plan that includes all 3 of us and your recent marriage, a real one this time, will play nicely into the undertaking. Rebecca slid the envelope to her place and laid her palm on it as Rose recited the orders for her benefit. For the first leg of our journey, we will travel on the Western and Atlantic Railroad. I must get to Chattanooga, and the 2 of you traveling with me will add to the ruse. Robert peered at Rebecca as a wry smile curled his lips. I am sure the accommodations will not be as comfortable as when we rode south from Richmond. Rose's fingers traced the rim of her cup. She picked it up, blew across the top, and sipped gingerly. True, passenger rail service is all but stopped. The Western and Atlantic line has 1 passenger car. Most soldiers ride on open flatbeds or in baggage cars. Rail service is constantly interrupted. Trains derailed or commandeered for troop movements, and many of the tracks have been destroyed to cause the rebels havoc in receiving supplies. What of Chex and Kona? Are we leaving them behind? Rebecca inquired. Robert patted his coat pocket. No, there is a chit with the tickets that shows they will be stowed on the train. Instructions were vague, just that we will need them when we come to the end of the line, wherever that might be. Robert chortled and winked. This time around, Mrs. Harper, we may also be pressed into riding in the baggage car. Rose laughed, and Rebecca was glad to see merriment on the woman's face. Quite possible, but for now, we have seats in the single-passenger car. Rebecca, you will travel as my niece and my companion as far as Chattanooga. Robert, you will travel as her husband on leave from the Confederate cavalry. You saw your regiment's roster and commander's name in the orders? Robert's eyes shone with levity, blew out an airy whistle. Never had to wear gray before. Captain William Brailsford's company. Some ferocious fighters. Lamar Rangers. Company H, 5th Georgia Cavalry, rank of 1st Lieutenant. Becca. I have been demoted. Should be quite intriguing. Robert dressed as a Confederate officer? Rebecca's voice rose in concern as she searched her husband's face. You could be a target for a Union bullet. Another chance for you to nurse me, he teased, reached over, and playfully tapped the tip of her nose. Rose raised a hand and interrupted Rebecca's retort. From the hotel to the train station, he will wear civilian clothes and not don his uniform until we have reached inside Chattanooga. Since our time together this morning, a porter has delivered 2 carpet bags to your room. Rebecca, one will hold a suitable traveling wardrobe. Nothing as beautiful as your scarlet gown, but very practical and attractive. The morning sun now spread across the dining room. Its scuffed, wide-planked floor needed polishing, and the tablecloths showed some The morning sun now spread across the dining room. Its scuffed, wide-planked floor needed polishing, and the tablecloths showed some frayed edges, but the light that streamed through the tall windows gave the room a welcoming charm. I am sure she will look fetching in any fashion. Robert placed a hand in Rebecca's and pulsed it. And her gown has been returned to her. Rose's eyes widened, and she smiled. Robert, the other will contain your uniform and slouch hat with its brass cavalry, crossed swords insignia, and gold acorn braid. Looks like Fessenden has thought of everything. Just about. I have arranged for some of my belongings to be retrieved from Atlanta. No telling what will become of the house after General Sherman marches through. I am not confident even a roof timber will still be raised. A The small trunk is all that I have left and should arrive this evening. Rose looked wistfully at Rebecca. I will look the proper aunt for you, Rebecca. Rebecca's eyes darted anxiously from Robert to Rose. You mentioned Dr. Bickley and the counterfeit gold plates, and then Captain Quantrill. Is there more? I am not sure how I'm to play the part other than as your niece. Rose dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, folded it, and placed it by her cup and saucer. She picked up her small clutch and pushed her chair back. Rebecca, believe me, your participation will be most essential. Further instructions will be given at the proper time and in the proper place. Have patience. Rebecca scowled at Robert's sudden deep chuckle. I can only tell you that I will leave you in Chattanooga, then north into Ohio. The two of you will continue west. You will receive further specifics in Chattanooga. Yes, there is something else afoot, but I am not at liberty to discuss at this time. Rose lifted herself from the chair, and Robert immediately stood, walked around the table to her side. She placed a hand on Robert's wrist and gazed up at him. Now, as far as the Confederacy and its spies know, Eugene shot himself with his own derringer when he realized his plans had been thwarted. Only you two, outside confidential channels, know the true reason for my husband's death. I left the gun by his side. The same linen handkerchief was pulled again from her clutch and gently dabbed at the corners of her eyes. Tomorrow we leave. I will send word where to meet and at what time. This afternoon I have further arrangements to make. Robert tenderly pecked her cheek. Rose stepped to Rebecca, who again saw a look of contrition in the woman's eyes as she held out her hand. My dear Rebecca. Rebecca gave her a sympathetic smile and pulled her into a tender hug. Rose pulled away and nodded in gratitude, gathered her skirt, turned, and left the dining room. Rebecca slowly sat as Robert walked behind her and planted a kiss on the top of her head. She swiveled to face him and reached out a hand to cover his sleeve when he too retook his chair. He rolled his arm, and her hand slipped into his upturned palm. His thumb caressed her skin, warm and reassuring. Tension pulsed in his jaw that reached to his blue eyes. He blinked and looked squarely at her. Becca, we may be riding into a giant hornet's nest. That is Chapter 4, Terry Heflin's Golden Circle. Check it out on Amazon, Terry Heflin's Golden Circle.